just 2 sacks in each of the past 3 seasons, and a combine performance that has everybody talking. Shemar Stewart is going to be one of the more intriguing prospects when it becomes draft time, so let's get right into it. So today we're going to be diving into edge rusher out of Texas A&M, Shemar Stewart, listed at just over 6'5", 267 pounds, with over 34-inch arms. He absolutely lit up the combine in terms of broad jump, vertical jump, explosiveness, the 40 time. However, the lack of production is absolutely going to draw some red flags for teams in the NFL. As a young player, just a 3-year junior, the upside feels so high with this player, but the question is how fast can you get him there, and how fast can he become productive in the NFL? The 3-down capability is absolutely within his game. He could be a strong side defensive end at the next level. There's really no measurement concerns with the player, and he does show athleticism and flashes in a lot of different areas that you would absolutely love. But then there's also games where he doesn't feel productive whatsoever. His plan seems completely out the window, and the lack of production based on his athletic traits that you would just assume he's going to do something in the NFL right away will lead to concerns, because the assumption of he's just athletic enough to make a few plays and he has the motor to do it didn't really show up at Texas A&M. So that's what we're going to be talking about today with Shemar Stewart. Now, in terms of pressure rates, he's in a fine spot here, 12.4%, a 5.5% run stop rate, which is a little bit lower, but it's not at a bad level, but it's maybe not typically what you would think is a first-round pick for an edge defender. So today is the perfect time to dive into Shemar Stewart after the combine performance and all of the buzz around this player. By the way, if you are watching this video and you want to know more about Shemar Turner or Nick Scott and his teammates, both those videos are out now. First step explosion. I actually ended up giving him a great grade here. There were a couple little things that held me off from pressing into an elite category with his ability to get off the ball, but the first step explosion is incredibly noticeable. He looks like he's in fast forward at times off the line of scrimmage, and it can show up both as a run defender and as a pass rusher that can deliver explosiveness throughout his first step. I think he's got adequate reactive timing, but the key there is it's very consistent. He's very explosive, that plays with very powerful strides off the line of scrimmage that feel very threatening at the point of attack. He's aggressive downhill off the backside. You see kind of that lateral burst where he could just close the backside airspace, come down and make a play in the backfield, but then also just fill behind the line of scrimmage, show his closing acceleration, which is also good, and also his ability when a quarterback gets out of the pocket to track down quarterbacks in space. There's a lot of things to like about his first step get off, and there are flashes where it looks absolutely amazing. There are some slight knocks I have here. For one, I think there's some false movement within his first step. You see within his footwork, which I think actually transitions more to his pass rush ability than anything, his pass rush plan, where there's some false footwork, where there is some staying in place and kind of resetting his feet right up the line of scrimmage. He also, I don't think, always creates the depth that he's potentially capable of, thinking about his height and his length. He doesn't always create that kind of depth within his strides. He's very twitched up in the lower body, very fast feet off the line of scrimmage, which could also help into entry positions as a run defender. There's a lot to like about his first step. That's why I ended up giving him a great grade here. Now, a couple little other notes to this. I talked about the closing acceleration in space. This is a thing. If a quarterback does get out of the pocket at the next level, I can guarantee you Shemar Stewart will be a threat in that spot to potentially add some production because of his ability to close in space. He also plays with a nice little eye balance when working into the backfield to kind of balance between finding blocks and also finding the mesh point with an NFL type of play speed attached to it, right? There's an urgency to his game, a lot of different aspects, which it does excite you because even though the polish feels very messy, the urgency to his game makes you believe that, okay, he's going to translate in play speed. It's not just about dialing everything else in, because things do tend to break a little bit loose when he's playing that fast within his own game. Undisciplined nature to his game when working upfield, however, and you'll see this based on the positioning into entry, taking on a pulling blocker, based on how he reads through the mesh point. There is some inconsistency in that point. Overall, it's a great first step explosion, and that's something that you love for edge rushers because that's one of the hardest areas to teach. You can't really teach that. You kind of just have it, and for Shemar Stewart, he absolutely has it, and his combine backed it up. Now, onto the play strength aspect, he is very good in this category as well. I don't even think he constantly taps into what his play strength is, yet you'll get a handful of reps of him just driving an offensive lineman 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. And at his worst, you'll see him get kind of pushed off the spot, knocked off his base, turned out of position, but rarely getting bulldozed downfield. And that, for Shemar Stewart, allows some of that strong side defensive end potential for him to be an edge setter at the point of attack and really be an enforcer down the road, also considering the length that he does carry as well. He's very powerful through the hips, which I think shows up both as a pass rusher and as a run defender. His ability to kind of roll through contact is incredibly noticeable. The thing I don't like, again, from a pass rush perspective, is I feel like he becomes a little bit linear, and this tends to kind of stall out his bull rush plan a little bit as well. He'll become a little bit upright. It's not as wide to allow his leg drive to continue and also stay wide base. That way he's not knocked off his pass rush plan. His feet really run through contact. He has a nice little pad level that he can create for tight ends. There's some knee bend that he can kind of sink himself down and create a stout entry at the point of attack. And by this, the way that he enters head on to blocks within the upper body, there's a stoutness to his game that he does play with. Now, he will get pushed out of gaps. And as I touched on, I think the biggest issue is he'll play a little bit skinny. He'll get a little bit vertical. He's not playing constantly as wide. And you'll see him kind of lose his base at the point of attack. You'll also see this when maybe splitting gaps the way he's skinny, not as wide base, not as foundationed onto the ground. And that allows guys to kind of set him out of gaps, push him out of the spot that he's trying to hold. And also, there's even times when you talk about the football intelligence where I think, and we'll get to this with the shed ability, where he's not always even aware of, okay, here's a pin pull block. I need to get back over top. I need to keep gap integrity. It feels like there's plenty of examples where he doesn't really maybe emphasize that he needs to keep gap integrity, which could be more of an issue at the NFL than it even was in college. He has plus core strength, so both his core and his hips very strong through contact. Those things are going to translate well when you think about a true pocket collapser. This creates inconsistent force through the ground for me. Too often, everything feels like it's coming through the upper body. You just don't feel it kind of launch into offensive linemen. You don't feel him attacking guys, but you see a violence within his game. It's a weird mesh, but I think the more consistently you can pull out his ability to actually create force through the body rather than just creating it through the upper body, there's going to be a lot more upside. Wrongs through half-man attempts as a pass rusher, which is really going to open up pocket collapsing capabilities as well. And I really do love his upside against guards. I think it's a sub package. You press him inside, put him against one-on-one against a guard. I think he is built to have so much success there with his get off, his half-man ability, and also some of the depth that he can cover. Feels to stay square at the line of scrimmage. You'll see this against double teams, two tight ends. He's not always square to the ball, and that throws off his play strength. But overall, he is a very strong player. He's built incredibly well throughout his frame, and as a defensive end, he has that kind of mold of explosive and strong, and that's why I gave him a very good grade in terms of play strength. Now, as a pass rusher, this was kind of the interesting spot for me because there are a lot of elements that I like. The production is very concerning, but I don't ever base this on how many sacks a guy has. Instead, can he close when he gets to the backfield? And for me, there was a mix of really dominant stretches and also stretches where you just didn't feel him any kind of impact whatsoever as a pass rusher. That being said, though, it does feel like there's a lot that needs to be added to this area of his game, while also it still feels like there's a lot that's already there that I do like, that I think is actually a little bit underrated because his numbers may cloud over what he's capable of. Overall, as a pass rusher, I ended up giving him an average grade as of now. When you think about guys like Donovan Ezaraku, Boston College, I think right now if you put these guys next to each other and you said, hey, which one's the better pass rusher? To me, it's clearly Donovan is the better pass rusher, but you could make the case that in time, you could believe that this player in Shemar Stewart actually could have more upside as a pass rusher, especially because they're very different styles, very different types, and we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end. But diving into kind of the pass rush aspect, one thing that I love is his ability to maintain speed, the way that he works around the edge. He works through his skip move really well, and he maintains a lot of speed, turning the arc, working around the corner, and he does have enough bend to get pretty flat to the line of scrimmage and also be able to create some half-man opportunities and collapse the pocket without constantly just running over and past the pocket. So has the hip flexion to really open up. That's very sudden, create flexion there, and that also transitions very well to inside-outside moves. It's an ability to kind of get an edge consistently because of some of the hip flexion he shows. His speed to power through his hips is incredibly impactful, as we touched on with the play strength, the real explosion that's created, and he's able to keep himself at the same pad level. That's the key there. Now, the problem is he doesn't always drop his pad level. He can kind of play a whole rep upright, which is a problem. However, he has an ability to not rise through the transition of speed to power because of some of the hips that he could open up and just roll through contact. That opens up a lot of long arm capabilities, and while I don't think we saw that nearly enough because of the patience that he plays with the long arm move, there is a lot of upside success there as well, also considering his length that he can get to that as a pass rusher. Get under pads on strides that lift, so if an offensive tackle is going to lift and not disciplined to kind of stay flat, he's very capable of kind of getting underneath your pads again because his pad level really maintains at the same spot. If you get an offensive tackle that rises when he has to transition or open his hips, that's where he can kind of settle himself down underneath and then get a little bit of a knockback. The problem is the best offensive tackles that we saw him face this past season didn't constantly have that issue, and then too often you would see him get stalled out through his reps because they weren't giving him that easy entry or an entry that could clearly knock them off balance. Now, one issue is he's got pretty heavy shake at the top of the rush. There's not a ton of natural shake to his game. It's a little bit heavy, an ability to really be a threat. His agility for me is just average at this point. I think there's some real foot quickness here, but in terms of having a lot of shake and looseness within his game, I feel like it puts kind of a cap sometimes on how he can act as a pass rusher. He is one of my best and favorite aspects is how reactive he is to offensive line sets very quickly. He kind of creates an early path of how he wants to attack an offensive tackle specifically, and this is great because he can do it right through his first step. He can read through the offensive tackle's immediate set and then be able to kind of adapt a path to work to the quarterback, and he tends to kind of lean all of his bull rush attempts towards the quarterback. There's a really nice path when working towards the quarterback. He plays with really tight angles. I think the thing that teams will love the most is how tight he can play to offensive linemen, how much airspace he can actually close, whilst that allows him to be a pocket collapser. He doesn't have to play 2 feet away from a guy to be able to create speed to power. He can play right on their hip and drive them back into the pocket. And I think the big thing there is the way that he's very reactive. He's decisive with his footwork. Not very often, just very choppy with his footwork. He's pretty decisive of how he wants to attack an angle, and his angles to me are one of his best traits as a pass rusher right now. He has a nice little chop move for when an offensive tackle doesn't allow him the opportunity to transition into a bull rush. And again, he can create kind of those opportunities a little bit early and be reactive off of it within his footwork. We get to some of the knocks here. And for one, I don't think there's a ton of creativity as a pass rusher right now. It doesn't feel like, and we'll get to this with hand usage, I wrote it down as he doesn't have a distinct go-to plan. Even though he's powerful, it still doesn't feel like he's like, I want to get to this as a pass rusher. Or when he sets like this, I'm going to go like this. It's more the path that's responsive to what he's saying, but it doesn't feel like the entire plan as a whole is super responsive to what the offensive lineman is allowing him the opportunity to attack with. It doesn't feel like he has a distinct go-to decision. And then there's a little bit of lack of creativity to me, back to some of the heaviness that you see in some of his transitions, to kind of be very, very reactive, something up that you wouldn't have expected, or be very creative at the top of the rush. There's not a ton of that, so it has to be decisive, which to his credit, he's pretty decisive as a pass rusher. Transitions are inaccurate, so speed to power, outside, inside, inside, outside, those can be a little bit inaccurate, which can lead to a loss of control at the point of attack. It can lose to him losing some footing, and also you'll see this the most when he's trying to plant and then drive speed to power conversions. You'll see just inaccuracy within kind of those transitions at the point of attack, and my big problem is he played it way too upright and have that many wins where he's not dropping his weight into those spots. Again, he could play at the same pad level, but if he's inaccurate with his entry and then he's also not dropping his pads, smaller, shorter offensive tackles actually gave him more issues. I thought he showed some real flashes against a guy like Will Campbell, but against a team like Missouri, it was inconsistent, his ability to actually create leverage, drop his weight, and too often he just kind of played with an upright pad level, just too high for an offensive line where it wouldn't drop down or necessarily take advantage of, hey, I'm a little bit taller, maybe I can work over top. You didn't see him take advantage in those areas specifically. There's a certain type that he was going to have more success against than other offensive tackles, which that has to be improved, because at the next level, they're going to find things that you don't do well, and they're going to play you with that as an offense. He's got limited sidestep depth. When you talk about, again, some of the shake, the ability to kind of cross face, there's a little bit of limited depth that he does cover there, but we'll talk about a positive to this, and that's, to me, there's a lot of suddenness with it. There's a lot of suddenness within that footwork. There's not a lot of false movement when he decides to stick and try to work back over top. There's a suddenness to his game. There's a dynamic element to his game when he does that. There's also some bend there, but that does allow him to create creases and to find little openings. It's just that he doesn't cover maybe a ton of depth within those spots. Speed to power is super decisive when he wants to get to it. It's also a lot of times a good plan when he does decide to go to it. It's not every time. It's not super predictable. He has an adaptive ability, so when he does decide to go speed to power, it's a decisive attack. It a lot of times allows early success, an early entry point that's pretty accurate, because it's a great decision for him to get into that kind of pass approach. Talked about his winning angles, pass rusher. One of my biggest knocks right now, however, is the flip side is I don't think he constantly comes in with much of a setup plan. There's not a lot of setup to his pass rush. While there's an adaptiveness, there's the set, let me get to this, let me try to attack this angle. There's not a lot of setup that feels like, okay, this is what I'm getting, this is how I'm going to set the offensive tackle up. Instead, it's like right to it. It's right to the go-to plan, whatever that plan may be. It's right to the angle he wants to attack, but there's not a lot of setup. So good offensive tackles can still be reactive to it and kind of beat him to a spot. And that's a big question for me, as I wrote down. How consistent is he going to be when an offensive lineman just beats him to a spot? When he gets to the spot that he was trying to get to, what can he do off of that? And right now, I haven't seen many answers when he does get beat to a spot. Too often right now, it's about beating him to the position that he recognizes early is going to be successful. But if he's beat there, or if he has to set it up, there's not a lot of craftiness and like, all right, here's how I'm going to get there, but let me show you how I'm going to get there. That way I can get this guy a little bit off balance. There's not a lot of that within his game right now. There's not a lot of creativity for ways. Like his skip step at time will feel like it's rushed. You'll see some of the lack of dip. That's the biggest problem. He carries some bend at the top of the arc, but he doesn't carry a lot of dip. And even though you'll see some shoulder flexion where he'll kind of shift his shoulders to try to avoid some contact and attack creases, which is more valuable for the interior, he doesn't play with a lot of dip to actually duck himself underneath pads and duck himself underneath strikes, which can be more of an issue, I think, on the outside, because there's more opportunity against taller offensive tackles to take advantage of that. Also transition to some of the lack of lean. You'll see him kind of stumble around when he's trying to work through the arc. And then also some of the crossface ability gets really limited, because not only is he not covering a lot of depth, he's also not dropping himself underneath strikes. He's kind of just staying at that same same pad level position that he was already in. What I do like is the way that he transitions really tight to the line of scrimmage. It opens up a lot of stunt success because he can become a very immediate threat. He can get on you very quickly. So if you're trying to set him outside shade of an offensive tackle, say he's in a 5 technique or trying to jump into a 3 technique over the B gap, he can play that very tight to the line of scrimmage, work stunts very aggressively. Now, he doesn't always show the ability to get square when he has to work really wide stunts, right? When he's trying to crash inside, he doesn't always show the ability to get back square, but he does show the ability to play very tight to the line of scrimmage, which especially if it's cleared out, if someone creates a stunt inside-outside form and he can wrap around, he's going to be able to play that very close and be able to rip through and kind of find a way to get to the quarterback and find opening pass there. I just didn't think we saw that enough through Texas A&M with some of their setups. His pace is very one-speed right now. Now, that doesn't mean he can't change his pace because there's different pace that he can get into, but this to me, again, back to the setup. There's not a lot of change of pace when he decides what he's going to be as a pass rusher on a given rep. There's a difference in he can play off his tackle slowly, he can play him a little bit faster. He has that adaptiveness to win at different speeds, but the problem is as the reps going on, there's not much of a change of speed. Everything feels like it's one speed from jump. And I thought it was against LSU, for example, against a really good offensive tackle, he was coming out super aggressive. He wanted to play at a super fast play speed and just put all the pressure on the offensive tackle. The problem is, though, as good as he looked getting off the ball, it felt like everything kind of lost control outside of it. There wasn't a ton of change of pace. It was almost like in basketball, just trying to run as fast as you can rather than changing, slowing up, speeding down. There wasn't a lot of that. It was like, I'm just going to run as fast as I can and see what this turns into. And he was stumbling all over the place in that game because he was, I thought, just playing out of control. He was playing at an NFL speed, but his play speed is something that would be concerning. The ability to play at that speed didn't look translatable at all. It looked very messy. So it shows you like, okay, he can play really fast. He can be a threat. But can he actually be successful at that speed? As of now, he didn't look successful at that speed at all. And that's one of those areas where, like, yeah, development-wise, we need something here. We at least have to give him a distinct plan. That way, when he's doing that, he knows where to get to and where he wants to get to and what spots he wants to try to set up, rather than just kind of running upfield and then doing nothing. It's insane speed, like I said, when he's turning the corner, which is great. That ability with his hips to kind of go through kind of the skip steps, still maintain speed around the arc. If an offensive tackle stalls for any reason, he can kind of beat him around to his spot. His lateral quickness, to me, is a little bit on the lesser side, and you'll see it's like on jet run, some lateral quickness to kind of be reactive side to side. I just think he's a little bit more of a rigid pass rusher than he is a really loose pass rusher, so it's very different than some of the other styles, but it's actually going to fit well to his play style. He's going to be a pocket collapser. That's going to be his game, so it makes sense that he plays with this kind of style. My big limitation here is I wish there was a little more shake to his game to actually open up more consistent entry points as a pass rusher, to open up all opportunities to get inside of an offensive tackle's chest, for example, an average pass rusher as of now. Now, when you get to a couple of the last categories here, from a shed perspective, this is an area where I actually gave him a good grade right now, is his ability to shed blocks. I said from the technical side, there's things I want improved, especially to lean into more of his play strength, but I think there's still a lot of upside of what he can do actually is just getting off of blocks consistently. One, there's not a ton of reactive movement laterally in some of the redirect, which is a little bit of a problem, like left to right, left to right. That's not great, but the first step is there. It's capable. I don't like how he is occasionally just late into spots. That'll limit his shed ability. We saw that against LSU where he's just late. There's false movement. He kind of strides for no reason, and then he gets to his spot and he's late, and he's going to get picked apart at the NFL for that. It doesn't happen consistently, but it flashes. But you do see there is a lateral movement skill to deal with wide zone schemes, to deal with the backside, to cut guys off, and to kind of maintain gap integrity as long as he plays with gap integrity, which I thought was a little bit inconsistent at times as well. He's got a very controlled entry within his hand usage, but also in his footwork. Problem is there's too much shoulder entry. There's too much just dipping my shoulder and not actually using my upper body to help myself out, which again won't translate to real stack and shed opportunities. But he's run scheme reactive with controlled footwork, so he can react to different looks. He can react to different offensive line sets because he has some of that control and some of the quickness within his game right off the ball, which is really great for a guy at his kind of size and his kind of length as well, for true upside there. His feet continue to drive through contact as a bull rusher, as a pass rusher, which is great for pocket collapsing. His feet can stop moving a little bit on the backside as he's continuing to pursue down the line of scrimmage. I like the shoulder movement. I like the ability to find creases. I like the hips. I like the ability to kind of slant and pick up little entryways if he's just being asked to attack a field. I just think his entry points are inconsistent. Like there's times that he'll just leave the ground. It's like, I don't know what that is. Or like I said, dipping his shoulder into contact. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to actually set himself up for consistent, sustained success throughout a rep. See a little more discipline and making sure like I got to be in my gap. Let me get there, rather than just kind of being willing to like, oh, I'm going to kind of go do my own thing. I'm going to go make a play. Because of his vision, which is great, and the pass to the ball, which is great, he tends to kind of, I think, get a little bit too much of, I'm not going to really need to stay in my gap here. I can kind of do my own thing, and maybe not even expecting some of the pin pull block setups, and then he just kind of gets peeled on the play without working back over top. He just kind of accepts it and goes upfield, which leads me to the hand usage, which is in a weird spot. I think it's slightly above average right now, but I think that there's actually a ton that I like about his hand usage. Like, weirdly enough, I like a lot of his timing. I like a lot of the patient aspects to his game. It just, I think there has to be more of a decisiveness in terms of plans as a pass rusher as a whole. That's not just hand usage to kind of tie everything together for him. But there's actually a lot of things that I like about his hand usage. So that's why I went slightly above average here, because I don't think there's a go-to plan, like I said, that's distinct with his hands. I don't think he always expects strikes from offensive linemen, which is a problem. He can get himself a little bit exposed where he's kind of not expecting a strike, and then he gets kind of latched, and then he gets kind of punched early. Now, he has the ability to really disallow an engagement, to really latch on. He doesn't get latched very often. He has an ability to kind of get off and work off those attacks. We just did Shemar Turner. I said he got latched at times. This is a piece that with his length, he doesn't get latched super often, but he can give up an early strike, an early punch, which is kind of slow down his process. Like a lot of things, I like the consistency of his inside entry as a bull rusher. He tends to, when he misses low, but he doesn't play incredibly high as a pass rusher either. Again, the entry points are very consistent because of kind of the pad level that he's able to maintain through reps. He's got a feel for timing, when to strike, when to get to his swipe moves. Again, the patience, I think, taps in really well to that. His hands don't always feel heavy, which is a problem when he gets, kind of knocked off his base and he doesn't create it through the ground. He doesn't always feel heavy at the point of attack, but he definitely feels violent within his hands. He's very fast with his two-handed swipes, and he plays with ready hands as a pass rusher. It's just at times I think the plan doesn't really make any sense for what he's trying to do. Like if he's trying to work inside, sometimes it's not a two-hand swipe. It's his go-to doesn't feel like it actually matches the opportunity that's really there. So against a team like Missouri, his entry did tend to get a little bit high when working against some of the shorter offensive linemen. To find break points and actually find a lot of success where he constantly, when he connects to those break points, actually creates, able to create space, and he's actually able to disengage off blocks, not still be latched, but kind of just rotate himself. He actually can get himself clean. Just his edge set as a whole can be a little bit messy. He'll enter in a little bit wide because of that within his hand usage, where maybe he lands one hand, but he doesn't land the other. And then it's like there's not really a great reset to his game to actually settle himself back in. He kind of just puts one hand in, and then he's just trying to overwork and overexert himself, which again, at the NFL is going to be much tougher. You're going to get really strong offensive linemen every week. And for that, it's like he's got to be a little bit more technically sound. Which brings you back to the overarching theme of this prospect, which is why doesn't he have more finishes? Why doesn't he have more sacks? Why doesn't he have a higher tackle rate? Well, one, is a run defender. Again, I don't think he constantly resets himself to actually make a play on the ball. He's more focused on driving through the blocker than he is actually stack and shed with a clean technical process. He can create movement, but it has to be clean to actually place a block and then be able to step off of that block and fill a gap and make a tackle. And then it comes back to gap integrity. And it's similar as a pass rusher. He loses control at the top of his rush. Back to his plan as a whole, because it's not fluid, it's much more rigid as a pass rusher. There's not a great plan for him to actually dial himself down and get to the quarterback. He turns out of control a lot of times once he gets to the top of his rush. So in both ways, technically, he limits himself in terms of being able to actually make consistent plays. Length is huge. The length is huge in pass lanes. The length is huge when you talk about as a stunt rusher, just to kind of be a menace for the quarterback, just to kind of stick his arm in there and just create a little bit of insecurity from a quarterback that wants to spill out of a pocket because he kind of feels it. And then also, I don't think there's always a great string to his plan. Like you'll see when he's working from tackle to guard, outside, inside, the strings of like, okay, I'm going to go here, then that way I can get to this, doesn't always feel great. It feels like he has a move, but everything kind of feels independent of each other. It doesn't feel like everything's on a string and kind of ties together into like a great big plan. It feels like everything's just kind of independent. Everything's just kind of thrown at the wall, and it's reactive, but it doesn't tie together with what he's really trying to get to for the full picture as a pass rusher. I like the long arm move. I like the timing. I like the consistency to disengage. So I think he has slightly above average hands. I like a lot of things about him, but the pass rush plan as a whole needs to be better. So overall, this is a player right now that critical factors-wise is pretty strong outside of pass rush. I think he's his average, but I think he can have an ability to really shed. I think he's good there. I think his hand use is already slightly above average. He's got average body control to me. He's a little bit stumbly, a little bit too stumbly, working toward the backfield. You'll see him on the ground a little bit too much, but overall, he shows some of the body control in terms of ability to recover from awkward positions. The agility and shake isn't great, but he does have some of the short area foot quickness, which to me is also average. His football intelligence to me is also average here in terms of, I like the activeness within his eyes, but I don't think the recognition is always makes a ton of sense, but he can be reactive to offensive lineman sets, which helps. His discipline is average as well. Again, the bouncing eyes is great, but some of the willingness to stay gap integrity, some of the mesh point reads are hit and miss, but I think he does tend to play with a disciplined mindset. He just doesn't always attack it in a disciplined nature because I think of some of the awareness. His motor is very good to great to me, and he's a super tough player. I think Shemar Stewart is one of these guys where, like I said, if you put him next to Donovan, or it depends, whoever you want to put as one of these top edge rushers that we've went through so far, you could easily say like, yeah, that guy's better than Stewart at this one particular category. Those guys I have, there's something that they're better than than he is at something. But it's going to be about the full package of Shemar Stewart that you're drafting. You're drafting this for truly 4 years, what this is through 4 years, not what this is through 1 year. And it's what can this eventually turn into as a full package, as a 3-down starter, as a guy that really can win both on the run defense and a pass rusher, live behind the line of scrimmage, play with a hot motor. You're drafting him for that. You're not drafting him for like, oh, hey, first 10 games, is he going to be an elite pass rusher? Because he's not. And we saw that. Like, if you just assume that athletically he's going to just get production anyway, you would have thought that would happen at A&M, and it really didn't happen. So there's real concerns to his game, real concerns, but I think when you consider the critical factors, you consider that there is the athletic traits there, it's just going to really take time. I think this is really going to take time, and you have to be patient with this draft pick. But if you are, and if you feel really good about your defensive line coaching staff, it's kind of like this with every Texas A&M pass rusher, from Nick Scorton to Shemar Turner. It's kind of the same thing. You have to have a good coaching staff that you feel good about and understand that it's going to take a second. But Shemar Stewart does truly have the makeup of a 3-down defensive lineman that can be impactful on both sides, that has a ceiling that's better than just average. Slightly above a guy like Jack Sawyer, puts him above Nick Scorton by 0.5, but it puts him, I think, in a different class than Jalen Walker or Demetrius Knight. I don't think he's there right now. The polish isn't there. The immediate impact is not there. I don't think it's there. But we know what his role is going to be. It's a pretty clear-cut picture. It's just about getting there. It's not like a weird tweener bill. We're not sure. We know what he's going to be. It's just about getting there. So I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.